Yeah, you know what? The a professor of mine used to say, when you're making a movie, casting is 50%. I think when you're working with children, casting is 80% because it's all about nailing the right decisions for the right role. And if you nail them, you have it. There's two kinds of filmmakers: the directors that write something thinking on how they're going to make it happen. Like, for example, I have this friend who once said, oh, I wrote the character of a kid. I'm going to put very little dialogue into this character because he's a child. So I'm not that kind of filmmaker. The other kind of filmmaker is you write whatever the fuck you have in your mind, and then you see how to make it happen. That's what I did. And the moment when I delivered the script to myself or to my crew, I was like, wait, how are we going to find these kids? The kids that can carry the whole weight of the movie. I mean, somebody told me, man, you made a 2-hour movie carried by 3 kids because, the parents and the girl, but you see them little. So it was all about the casting process. I worked with Rocio Belmont, who this is my 3rd movie with her. She's a great casting director. And we opened up a casting process for like 8 months. We saw a lot of kids. Mateo, the youngest, was actually the easiest to find because the moment I saw him, I was like, that's him. Very easy. Then Oliver, the middle brother, was a little harder. But I would say the hardest was Salvador, the oldest kids, because originally I had envisioned somebody younger, somebody in the age like 11, 12, somebody who wouldn't look. Now you see the movie and you see like 1 teenager and 2 boys. I didn't want that. My original idea was 3 boys, and that the oldest one would be like 11, 12. So when he's in that scene with the girl, the bed scene, it would actually seem like he's a little kid with an older woman. But it was really hard because, that role, he's yelling a lot. He seems like a military general. And the kids that were 11, 12, it looked fake. The performance, it looked like they were playing. So the casting director told me, Isaac, let's go and let's age him up. And we started looking at kids that were 16, 17. We found Felix, who I think does an amazing job, but had to kind of compromise and let go of that idea I had of like a young kid with an older girl. She's still much older than him. He's 17 and she's 25. Somebody told me that you can see the age in the eyes of a person, but still, because he's very tall, it almost looks like there's 2 people in the same age hooking up. But I had to let go of that idea, which still works between them. There's a great chemistry. She still looks more mature, but I had to let go of that idea in my mind of a kid and another woman in order to, for the rest of the movie, have an actor that is better for the role. And that was a little bit of the casting process. Well, it's those roles are very, very physical. So I needed actors that would really deliver a very physical performance, right? So I looked them up almost with that in mind, thinking of actors that could deliver that performance, that could be very physical actors. And, sometimes you look at actors in terms of how is their performance, how is their technique, dialogue, and sometimes you just look like a physical type. And in this case, I need to look for both. I needed actors that were very, very skinny, very, very thin, so that you could tell, because I didn't want to make like fake zombies, or somebody at some point even suggested like CGI beasts. I was like, no way, I want them to look human. So actually we did a lot of research on real human conditions like anorexia, like people with eating disorders, like people losing hair for cancer. Like we did a lot of research on that. So we needed actors that would be very thin, that would be very expressive in their eyes, that would have a lot of control in their movements. We needed a woman with very short hair, so she wouldn't have a problem, going all bald. So we don't have to put a bald on her. So it was a lot of boxes they had to click. We were lucky that Horacio and Norma really clicked those boxes. Norma is actually a model, and she is a teacher in movement for actors in Casa Azul, which is one of the biggest acting schools in Mexico City. And that's what she has. She has all this really control of her body. And I discovered that from day one. And then Horacio, I chose him more because of his facial expression. And he didn't have so much control over his body, but that worked out great because they were not the same creatures. I feel Horacio is more like a classic Romero zombie. and Norma is more like a creature, like a reptile creature. And men and women are different in the real world, so it would only make sense that when they become creatures, they can also be different. So I like the contrast between them. Instead of trying to force one into being what he's not, I just used both of their, I guess, skills or conditions or characteristics to make the characters different. And it was great working with them, a very physical performance. They had to be in makeup almost 4 hours every day they came. So in the house, it was very easy because we would just call them at 7, 8. We would start with the kids and then they would be ready by noon. But the tough thing was when we did the basement. The basement was a separate location and it was only them for 5 days. So that week, they had to be the first ones to arrive, the last to leave. Makeup took 4 hours to put in and 4 hours out. So that week was insane for them and they really delivered. Well, if you look at my letterbox, you'll see The Fly is one of my 4 favorite movies of all times. And yeah, of course, a lot of zombie movies as references. You know, some of my favorites are, of course, Wreck, 28 Days Later, The Girl with All the Gifts. I would say a big reference was Romero's Day of the Dead, because that's a movie where it's very bleak, and where that's one of the few movies where you actually see how they're training a zombie. You know, trying to teach things to a zombie. The Day of the Dead is totally like that. You know, it's a movie about teaching things to a zombie, right? So those were some of the references, but I also always like picking up on something that already exists and twisting it a little bit, right? So that's something I did with this movie. I picked up on the zombie tradition, but you know, there's been a million zombie movies. They're all about the same thing, zombies invading the streets and invading houses at the end of the world. And I decided that's not so interesting. What's interesting for me is to make a movie about a different family, a family that works upside down, a movie that is more intimate, more contained, more... Somebody said it was like a Stephen King meets Romero, and that's exactly, I wanted to give that touch of the coming of age aspect of it. And also I always like using the genre as a metaphor. In this case, it's a metaphor about the universal truth of how parents take care of children, and then it's the other way around. So I wanted to make a story about how from a very young age, kids have to take care of their parents, right? And at the same time, it's a story about trying to save a family, trying to keep a family united no matter what, which is something I can personally relate to. So that's how I try to differentiate from other zombie movies. And yeah, references included from those zombie movies I mentioned, even to great coming-of-age movies that I love, like Pan's Labyrinth and The Devil's Backbone, which for me are the two masterpieces by Del Toro, or even other movies with children in the leading roles, like I would say, like Don't Be Afraid of the Dark, like the others. But I would say the one movie that was the genesis of the idea was Goodnight Mommy. When I saw Goodnight Mommy, it blew my mind, and I wanted to make something in that vein. I deeply considered dedicating it to them because I didn't want people to assume that, you know, my parents were zombies or something. I actually come from a very tight, united family. My parents are great and they've been a great support for me. So none of that is from real life. But yeah, the family dynamic. I'm the oldest of 3 brothers. I wouldn't say I put a lot of my brothers into these characters, but because it's a story about 3 brothers, I wanted to dedicate the movie to them. And the only one thing I would say is I was always growing up the less physical of my brothers. I was always more strategic, but I never played football, I never did any sports. And my brother, the one in the middle, was, you know, karate, soccer, football, all that. So in my original version of the script, the older brother was in a wheelchair, and the 2 younger brothers were carrying him around. And maybe that was my way of saying, yeah, I was always the less physical of my brothers. And that's the only thing. Out of that, I don't think there's a lot of my life in this other than 3 brothers, like me and my brothers. We're excited to see how it plays out. Thank you.
No estás deshora.